everyone, and welcome to Diamonds for Peace, final webinar entitled Emerging Technology for Transparent Supply Chains. My name is Megan Wisely. I am a volunteer with Diamonds for Peace, and I will be today's MC. So the webinar will last about 1 hour, and the presenter will present for approximately 40 minutes, and then we will have time for questions. But if there are lots of questions, we might run over a little bit. So a few things before we start. Your video and microphone are not available. If you encounter any issue during the webinar, please send a message to all of the panelists, which is the organizers, using the chat box. If you have a question that you'd like to ask the presenter, please enter your question in the Q&A box. And if you see a question that is the same as yours that's already been entered, just like it, and then the presenter will answer the questions with the most likes. Please refrain from recording the webinar. It is being recorded, and then the URL will be emailed to all of the participants. And when you exit the room, when the webinar is over, you will see a questionnaire, and we ask you to please answer the questions in the poll so that we can deliver even better webinars in the future. So just a few words about me. I have been volunteering with Diamonds for Peace for about 3 years. I met Chie Murakami at grad school in Washington, D.C. In 1997, and we had some projects that we did together and took an information gathering trip to Haiti together. And so I've been excited to help her with her new endeavor with proofreading and organizational capacity issues. So Chie is actually going to start the webinar today with a few words about Diamonds for Peace. So let's welcome Chie.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the world. We welcome you to this webinar. It's our last webinar for the year. So welcome. And I just want to introduce about Diamonds for Peace. We are a small NGO. Our vision is to create the world in which all the diamonds are mined, cut, and processed with humanitarian and environmental considerations. And our missions are to improve the working conditions and social status of the workers in the diamond supply chain, and to promote ethics and fairness in the diamond industry. So we founded this organization in 2015, and then in Japan. Then in 2016, we founded Diamonds for Peace Liberia in Liberia, and we obtained the special consultative status at ECOSOC United Nations. And we also joined the Civil Society Network for OECD due diligence guidance for responsible supply chains of minerals from conflict-affected and high-risk areas. So currently, we work in Liberia and Japan. And this is the simplified supply chain of diamond jewelry from mining, cutting, polishing, manufacturing, and selling. And we have 2 pillars of program. One is self-reliant support with the miners and diggers in Liberia. And also, we do the activities to raise the awareness, especially of the consumers, because we believe the consumers have the biggest voice in the supply chain to change the industry. So our goal is to create the mechanism of responsible mined diamonds to be circulated in the legitimate international markets, and their fair share will be redistributed to the mining communities in Liberia. So that's what we are aiming right now and working for. So today we invited Carrie George from Everledger to talk about the emerging technology for transparent supply chains. So please welcome Carrie.
Thank you so much. I really am excited to be here, and it looks like we have a good group. Kudos to Diamonds for Peace for putting this together, and Chia, this is great. So I'm going to share my screen and my presentation. A lot of the work that we're doing and my interest in this, for those of you who don't know me, I have worked in a number of different companies for about 15 plus years, including Apple as well as Brilliant Earth and others, and worked at the US State Department on issues of mineral sourcing, but also of small scale production on farms and other materials. My interest in technology and the reason that I came to Everledger was in order to make it easier to translate the good work that is being done on the ground by so many actors, including Diamonds for Peace, and get it to the consumer and to the brands that want to select and incentivize that good work. So with that, let me introduce Everledger. My company that I work for currently is an emerging technology company led by our fearless founder, Leanne Kemp. Leanne is a charming and brilliant woman who has really focused our efforts on transparency, trust, and sustainability in order to improve marketplace transactions, and trade globally. We have been around for 5+ years, starting off in gemstones and building products, gemstones and diamonds, and building products each year into different industries that are relevant to the type of technology we use and also the ecosystems we're developing. So it's probably no surprise that when we start with diamonds, we move to gemstones, gemstones moves us to metals and luxury goods and luxury items such as wine and apparel. And quickly we start going into high value items such as electric vehicle batteries that are related to different metal sectors that we've been working in. And metals and batteries have led us into circular economy. We always wanted to do a lot of these things, but it does translate and connect as you move through it. We have loads of clients and partners globally. Some of them you'll recognize, such as Tencent, MCQ. You'll see with the Ford, Avery Dennison, but others might be ones that you're less familiar with, but it will translate really quickly if I explain it. COEX is one of the largest container exchanges in Australia, and so that's where you're getting, a certain number of pennies for each container or consumer packaging material that you return, SAP and others you've recognized. So moving forward, for our technology, Gia asked me to have a quick overview of blockchain. And I refer to this as demystifying blockchain. Just think of blockchain as just one more technology that interacts with the internet. Leanne always says, well, we won't be talking about blockchain in 5 years. She said that 3 years ago. We really stopped talking about blockchain. So she gave us a little cushion there. But think of it more as the way we talk about hypertext today. We don't. But in 1989, hypertext was really the basis of what became the World Wide Web. And that some physicists wanted to transfer data faster and more effectively and communicate with each other better. So they did that relationship from computer to computer. Ultimately, that builds out into different types of technologies for emails, for being able to have ATM transactions globally, not just per site, per bank, and then into distributed peer-to-peer transactions with blockchain, and now blockchain being used for so many other applications. So we refer to it more as thinking of we were at the World Wide Web, and now we're moving towards a worldwide ledger that will be part of the internet ecosystem. Understanding a little bit of that, what we're looking at is enabling not just blockchain, but many types of technologies for more knowledge, trust, and sustainability in these types of transactions. And as a corporation, we are trying to live by each of those principles for our products and people and our planet. So the people we interact with, our consumers, protecting their privacy, ensuring the people who work with us have fair work environments and balanced work environments, the planet. So our cloud energy and monitoring how much impact we have, but also looking at our product and making sure that it is for the benefit and using technology for good overall for people and planet. A quick overview of our technology: think of it as know, show, tell, and sell. Um, we're enabling these and we're enabling each one for the other. So we're helping people track, in some cases, trace the specific mineral, or in others, it's mass balance, authenticate, and verify the material or product. Showing that information, making sure the appropriate evidence or compliance documents are provided, and then allowing people to interact with their own data through various insights and dashboards, and helping them to be able to tell that story to their market, engage with the consumers, and ultimately building towards helping those transactions and sales. We use, as I mentioned, a number of technologies from blockchain, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things. And I'm not going to go through every single one of these in how it applies to mining, in particular artisanal mining today, but there's a number of different actors that are doing great work with sensor technologies for identifying parts per million of particulates in whether that be related to mercury or other types of pollution. These are all things that we can scale up our own abilities in terms of monitoring. So trying to prevent the bad, but also use prevention of bad and improvements there to incentivize the good. So how do we bring those benefits back to communities and to miners that are actually complying with those activities? And so through that, you can see know, show, tell, and sell, understanding the supply chain and bringing it through to data and insights, and ultimately that consumers can see it at a touch of their hand. So going through this and getting into the mining information, why everyone's here today. You know, as many of you know, mines feed many markets and many actors. And so similarly, a lot of times these stories are often told from the brand's perspective, where they're trying to source and understand so many different actors in their supply chain. But mines are also interacting upstream with many, many actors. And it's important to keep that in mind, that it's not just jewelry, oftentimes it's many other sectors. This is especially the case in precious metals, as well as other materials, that they might be interacting with almost every type of major consumer industry that you can imagine. And so how do we enable for them ease of getting their information out, and then also support so the efficiency of getting back incentives and benefits to them happens more readily and consistently. Oh, sorry, this skipped forward. Wrong slide. So going forward, sorry. We have a number of different data documents and sources that we ingest. So as mentioned, it could be sensor information, it could be third-party certificates from auditors, and it could be different types of plug-in partnerships from others. In the case of when we're doing information with greenhouse gas emissions, we could be plugging in directly to a utilities company that a mine's using, a factory's using, or a retailer's using. We can also just be pulling their utilities bills. In other cases, expert reports. So there's a number of nonprofits that are doing amazing work with artisanal miners as well as communities. Those reports could be fed directly into the blockchain and permissioned according to what the NGO would want or the community would want to be released to protect the privacy of the data, but also hold it in a place that would be considered something that an NGO could share readily and immediately. Across the supply chain, our approach basically is around tracking, measurements, verification, and impact. And I can give you just some quick examples here of how we're doing in the battery sector for greenhouse gas emissions. for verifying recycled content. And in the case of our work with Moyo Gems, showing different types of information about that impact in the field. So moving forward into how this looks, with our sustainability goals, we are trying to show that we can not only have accurate reporting, which is a big part of the reason many companies don't often make claims at the product level. Some companies make these claims too quickly, and some companies won't ever make these product level claims because of concerns. But we can show a level of accuracy that hasn't been seen before, that we can continue to bring forward to clients and help them make those relationships, and make products that matter and can benefit those that have made the efforts to improve. We can also help with efficiency of reporting, and then ultimately, again, to bring those benefits back to the people that are making the difference on the ground. So let's talk about efficient reporting and human rights due diligence and due diligence overall. We have a poll for you just to kind of get a sense for what type of due diligence you're doing. So I'm just going to pause here for a moment and get a good sense of the type of activities people are doing right now. So are you just engaging with your suppliers via email? Maybe you're doing field visits, maybe you conduct audits or you engage others to conduct audits. And maybe you have other, it can be all of the above. So pick as many as are relevant to you. I wouldn't be surprised if it turns out pretty even. It's kind of fluctuating here, but maybe the other categories. So a lot of emails, a lot of field visits, looks like. And this changes oftentimes with different consumer products. Field visits, that's great. I have noticed a lot of jewelers do a lot more field visits than some of the other consumer brands, but not always the case. So this is great. Okay, well, great. So we are definitely ahead on the field visits. Yep, 13 overall, or 7 out of 13, and then others in terms of audits, supplier emails, and other. Well, let's go ahead and we'll continue. So that's good information as we move forward into understanding what the types of due diligence requirements that are out there. I'm not going to go into detail over these, but just to overview that, as many of you know, there is adopted legal requirements for different types of due diligence, especially in the human rights space. Excuse me, I have a little bit of a cold right now.
Very sorry for interruption. Could you close that Zoom setting screen? Because a part of it is shown on your slide.
Oh, this.
Yeah, that one. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Yes. If you see the due diligence legislation here across the world, that there is a number of different requirements globally, and that these continue to be added, and then as opposed to being pending going into full requirements or fully accepted requirements. And how we're engaging with these is trying to pull out that evidence in a cleaner and more readily available fashion. You can see this in the jewelry sector, that these types of requirements have grown, and that doing the claims that were initially established with the Kimberley process and by the World Diamond Council and the consortium involved in the Kimberley process is no longer sufficient. And WDC has acknowledged that, and Responsible Jewelry Council has as well, and expanded that to their guidelines document. But we are continuing to also try to support the efforts for expanding and making further impact overall. So first of all, just by origin, you can still use the Kimberley process certificate, as well as establishing legal sourcing with your systems of warranty statement that's been expanded, your Kimberley process certificate, and then a clear invoice record, so that you can do the relevant know your customer and anti-money laundering checks. And we have established partnerships with organizations that actually do those anti-money laundering checks or have those relevant lists. Um, as you're moving forward to make that specific claim on a diamond or a ring or whatever item it might be, it's important to recognize that the number of documents that have to be gone through to make that product level claim can be quite substantial, as many know. And what we do is we have multiple automated processes, as well as being able to timestamp information relevant to that real-time necessity, that real-time reporting that's necessary for that product level claim. In this example, just by pulling in one type of document pull, in reviewing 41,000 documents, we found the 25 that were identified. And this is, not instantaneous, but minutes to, an hour that, you're running a program to follow that sort of thing. And, identify the inconsistency in the 25. That's the level of accuracy that many companies are looking for to be able to do this. And then you multiply that by the many hundreds of types of documents, and you see that it becomes necessary to apply different types of technology and machine engagement so that the humans can do the more complicated and nuanced work of interpreting that information later. And these are just different types of examples that I would pull out. For example, different types of audits and certificates that we can readily digitize, and in some cases are PDF'd already, but we can pull relevant information, work with these actors to make sure that is consistently reported, and that that information is used in a way that would be appropriate. Other types of information, from fair mind and fair trade, can be digitized as well. And even the benefits that go back to them could in the future be ultimately done through interoperability through many types of blockchains that are out there. This isn't an Everledger, takes over all. This is what I'm presenting is how technology should be enabling all of these actors, and as well as NGOs and projects that are moving on the ground, such as PACT, Impact Facility, Solidaridad, and so many others that are working on this. So, I bring out two examples. This is the RMI Copper Mark on the right. It's a simplified one, but just showing the different types of audits and certifications, and then the one from Apple on the left. When you do the type of work on human rights and environmental and social impact due diligence, many audits and many different types of industries are using different types of statements to make their sourcing credible. You have to ingest that. When I was managing teams at Apple, I had many people working on these types of activities, and it's very costly to do it manual or semi-automated when the industries aren't doing it. And there's different types of groups at RMI, World Economic Forum, and other places that are working on engaging how we'll do the technology side of interoperability, but these types of engagements and understanding how to make your lives easier will also be part of that. And I encourage people that want to be able to do that to reach out, because we're working on those things with several different peers and competitors as well. Just another example of efficiency that can be brought to bear. So I talked about accuracy, but efficiency, when you look at the manual processing of some of this data, we worked with a third-party auditor that would pull in this data and then assess it accordingly. They were able to process about 200 of those documents per day. That could be a KP certificate, that could be a different type of lab report. It's something that would be a consistent document that they're reviewing, about 200 per day. When you couple a human plus automated processes, you're going to 10,000 or more a day. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to engage parallel processing so that the blockchain, the AI, the machine learning, and the overall human capacity is increased for impact much more quickly on the ground and directly. And I'm just showing some examples of how we would pull this data and the sources here. when we look at ingesting these from websites, for example, when maybe you're someone who has a handful of suppliers, but maybe you're someone who has hundreds of suppliers. And when you're looking at pulling this type of information, sometimes, let's say one actor has 4 or 5 reports or, email attachments. That's what we're demonstrating here. So let's say we have 900 actors, reports, and you'd have to download each one of those. The way we would do it, it would take 20 minutes to download and then identify what type of documents they were. And in the case that we did this with one specific activity, we got 1,500 PDFs from those, and then we're able to read and capture and digitize each field for relevant permission access in the future in less than 2.5 hours. So that's the difference in just real time and capture that we're pointing to. So I'm going to talk a couple things just about responsible mining and ASM in a moment, and then energy metrics. But overall, we've covered a number of different things that here in terms of sustainability reporting. One of the things is just that it was scope 3 reporting and mining and greenhouse gas emissions. It's scope 3 is when you get to the upstream and the indirect emissions from transportation, as well as the specific upstream activities. When we're looking at the impact of this, it's estimated to be 5.5 times higher than scope 1, meaning your direct emissions if you're a retailer just doing transportation locally and basic manufacturing from your maybe B2B relationship, and then your actual energy source. But again, scope 3 is looked at to be 5.5 times higher. This is usually because it's mined material or the more significant processing power and the refining process is included in scope 3 typically. When we were doing estimates of how much time and energy would be saved through different types of emerging technologies being applied, we use the GREET model, which is done by Argonne National Labs, which is one that US looks to quite a bit. And what we've done is, this is just a graphic version of what is done in the back end, but we are enabling so that you can see relevant data sources and the maturity and robustness of that data, as well as the independence of that data. In some cases, different metrics and data are reported as a self-reported data point. And in other cases, they have third-party verification and validation. Sometimes they fit really cleanly with the GREET model that's described, and sometimes we have to use different types of coefficients. If, for example, a coefficient is the factor in which you multiply the energy amount by to estimate its overall greenhouse gas emissions. In some cases, maybe that factor doesn't fit into this model. There's a number of ways to look at this, but what we're trying to pull out is that we can help move forward conversations in a cleaner way by doing this overall. So going forward, just trying to pull in the different data, but then also energy data, for example, we can start helping also scale for low carbon investment opportunities. We've had a number of banks reach out to us to say, how do we get this type of data from a number of different industries, including the jewelry sector, saying, we believe that there could be a lot of low carbon investments, and we'd like to be able to demonstrate that, but how do we do that? And that's why we've been engaging more on this. And as you can see, while 75% of the S&P companies produce annual sustainability reports, only 36 have external assurance. One of the things that we, as a technology company, never look to replace assurance, but we can provide a middle ground where we remove a lot of the ambiguity of human engagement on some of the aspects. And then what I talk to auditors and assurance providers about is that we provide them the anomalies in the system readily, as opposed to them trying to find if there are anomalies or other types of issues. Additionally, just showing costs of doing some of this manually. We had one intern just to do a quick review of how much time it would take for them to do one mine to one refiner to one manufacturer in the battery sector. And so they, in researching that, it would take approximately, 40 hours plus potentially $6,000 of reports to get that overall. And that would only be one chain, really, and one line of the multiple chains for a single product. And you can imagine how much more complicated this gets. This is just one of our pages from our system, and what it's showing is just different types of environmental footprint that can exist with the different types of categories of human rights, environment, legal, and overall how we can do this, embed this into the overall ecosystem of data and information. But going back to some of the impacts on the ground, one of the things that I am most passionate about is making sure we utilize technology so that we're incentivizing improvements and getting information and resources to those that are actually doing the work to make improvements, mitigating challenges and things like land reclamation and others. And so one of the things, the tie-in for us here as the first effort here is that tying GHG to relevant offset partners, but offset partners that can also associate with the actual region in which your production or various refining or other activities are occurring. So you get closer to where the issue is and improve it there. This is tying two concepts together of, give back, as many people say in the jewelry sector, to actual impact on the ground and mitigation efforts from a more due diligence standpoint. And so this is just one partner that we were looking at and how we can actually tie in once we have direct reporting from a supply chain on greenhouse gas emissions. We can show exactly how that data was accumulated. And instead of spending all the money to go through and gather that data initially, it can go directly to their website and to the project on the ground. And that this is where we can also enable multiple actors in the supply chain, including customers, to be able to contribute to those types of impacts on the ground. In this case, we're talking about GHG offsets, but there could be a number of different impacts on the ground that we can be tying this to. And that connects us to incentivizing impact. And we'll go to just our next survey question for the group. And this will be about just artisanal mining. And are you currently sourcing from artisanal miners? Are you seeking to source from artisanal miners? And just a yes, no, if it may not be your top priority right now, and we can just kind of get a view for this. Another maybe half and half, a little bit less on the yes. All right. So, we have just a little bit above half and half here. Well, I mean, not according to elections, but this is not too far off from 5 to 7 in terms of people who voted. So we have here the just 42%, 5 of you saying yes, and 7 of you saying no, that you aren't currently sourcing or seeking to source. And so I'll just add how we've been looking at ASM, because it seems as though no matter where we're turning to in our supply chains and with our partners, artisanal mining is continuing to come up in it being a critical source of materials, but also a critical group of actors in our supply chain. As you can see in automotive and electronics, as well as in jewelry and luxury, our artisanally and small scale mined materials come up. We did this little graphic just saying, you know, think of it as 1 in 5 electric vehicle batteries being made from artisanal miners in terms of how much material is actually there. Our current engagement, and this is just the gemstone activities, it includes 44 countries with over 13,000 gemstones. And I actually think this is an older number. I need to get updated. But what we're looking at is that artisanal mined material, in the case of gemstones, from back here, that 80% of gemstones are produced with artisanal miners. Artisanally mined material goes across the world. Not only that, but the number of artisanal miners and their impacts for communities in which they're present are substantial. When you look at approximately 150 to 200 million livelihoods depend on artisanal mining. And it's not to say large scale mining isn't important, that is definitely true. But when you look at the comparison of 40 million people actually directly associated with artisanal mining and only 3.7 million for large scale mining, the exponential impact for people here is substantial and should be recognized. This is an example of some of the work that how we're thinking of how you can consider bringing together multiple different partners and looking at how you improve on the ground. And I'm going to pause here and just show a video, an interview from one of my favorite partners with Fairphone, and I did this interview during their time zone, so just bear with me. Let me know if you can't hear it, if everything's okay.
Carrie, we don't hear anything.
Okay, one second.
To split up a response and give us a few examples of best practice. Hi, I'm so excited to bring Fairphone into this conversation. Thank you, Tirza and Jersum, for joining us today. Fairphone has done a number of programs with artisanal and small-scale mining activities, as well as driving better practices with the large-scale mining across the world. I am going to kick off with just asking Tirza and Jersum to split up a response and give us a few examples of best practices and change that you've been trying to engage on in the artisanal and small-scale mining world and in what commodities.
Fairphone started out as an awareness-raising campaign for conflict minerals. And since then, we've been working really to improving the conditions in ASM, acknowledging that conflict minerals, but also cobalt are often mined artisanally.
At the moment, we are engaged in improvement programs related to artisanal mined gold and cobalt. Gold, our engagement started already in 2017, so it's a program that's been running for 3 years. And cobalt is a relatively new program that we started with, let's say, in full swing in the middle of this 2020. In terms of best practices, I would rather say that this breaks down into 3 key elements or 3 components. The first element would be the approach that we take into looking at, let's say, issues and problems of ISM mining that are happening on site, so at the mine operation itself, as well as what is happening at the wider community. So in a sense, by looking broadly about what is happening at the ISM level, we use a kind of landscape approach in which we don't just address the problems at the mining operations, but we also analyze the relationship between the mine operations and the community around. As a second key element that we pay attention to is basically the sense or the notion of a continuous improvement plan. So this idea comes from the fact that in our relationship with ISM is one in which Fairphone doesn't or wouldn't expect the ISM operations to be 100% perfect at the point in which we start engaging with them. But we rather take a more realistic approach, and we say we will already start engaging with you at the point in which the ISM operation also commits to a continuous improvement path. And this continuous improvement path, let's say, is one that gets commonly agreed between ourselves as an organization or as a part of a consortium together with the ISM organizations at the very beginning of the programs. In this way, for instance, the ISM group then can feel the full benefits of investing their time and their effort in becoming more and more responsible from the very start of our relationship in what we would already denominate a true partnership, one in which you start building trust with one another from the very beginning, and you don't just expect them to improve up to the point that you will start engaging with them. And the third important element is the engagement that we want to create, which is not just between Fairphone as a company and the ISM groups, but is really the supply chain engagement. We believe that supply chains are a driver or can become a driver for the expected changes that we have, and that is the approach that we take.
And could you continue and add on to that and talk about the differences between some of your work with artisanal and small-scale mining and the best practices and improvements that you're aiming for in the large-scale mining activities?
We expanded our scope in the context of our Fair Materials agenda beyond the conflict minerals and have now really 8 materials in focus and in scope. And some of these materials are majorly large-scale mined, for example, lithium and rare earth. So what we believe is an important topic, but also an issue in general related and surrounding LSM mining, is that it's not really used always as a driver for development so much. It's instead often causing environmental pollution for communities, depriving them, for example, of land and water, and, well, as I said, not always leading and creating significant economic opportunities. We actually expect large-scale mines to show good performance on the environmental and social and governance performance, but also look again beyond this mine site. So Jersom explained we work with ASM sites and communities, and we also seek that LSM mines look beyond their mine site and see mining really as a driver for development, engaging and supporting the communities surrounding the mine to benefit as well. So ultimately, the goals for ASM and LSM are not so much different. We're not just looking at it from a risk perspective, but then again, really wanting to create this impact and positively impacting people and planet. So first of all, expecting mines, whether it's ASM or LSM, to continuously improve, to transparently and publicly report also in progress and performance. And then also for LSM mine operators to really co-invest in communities so that they can benefit and thrive and really bring community development.
And what type of partnerships and collaborations are you using in the artisanal and small-scale communities and programs? And is that different or similar to what you're doing in large-scale mining?
Yes, indeed, Carrie. So partnerships are for us key in order for us to drive sustainable change, regardless of whether we're looking at ISM programs or large, or let's say, large-scale mining programs. This is actually well embedded in the spirit of asking, asking the different supply chain actors to actually show engagement with the problems around material sourcing, regardless of the size of that source. So from that perspective, we always work around the notion of creating partnerships because that's the only way that we see things will, keep moving in the future. And just to give you a couple of examples, so in the case of our gold program in Uganda, we have made a partnership that of course includes us, and we also have brought on board other electronic industry players as, let's say, the downstream representatives. But we have also reached out to international and local NGOs, which we also consider very important actors and stakeholders. So for instance, we collaborate closely with UNICEF and EVOS, who, for instance, with their expertise into combating issues such as child labor, give us a very big advantage in terms of, the different aspects that we can tackle while engaging with ISM. We, Fairphone, of course, are not experts in child labor, and we reach out rather to the experts in the topic to address these issues. Another example is the fact that in the same partnership, we work with Fairtrade and Solidaridad, who have many, many years of experience in forging responsible supply chains in a very credible and reliable fashion. So once again, we are not necessarily as Fairphone, the experts into all the different aspects. Of course, we look at how to make the material integration, and then we build alliances in which we bring, let's say, different skills to address all the different issues that are surrounding ISM communities. The second example would be the program in the DRC related to ISM cobalt mining, and in that circumstance, for instance, we also feel that let's say the responsibility for addressing all the different issues is not solely a responsibility of the mine operators or the upstream players, but this is again, something that needs to be shared and thought through again by all the different supply chain actors at the different levels. In that spirit, the program that we have started in the DRC becomes a kind of demonstration program, but that program will then be pushing an agenda which is much larger than the partnership we have on the ground. And for that one reason, we have decided to form what we have now named the Fair Cobalt Alliance. And the Fair Cobalt Alliance becomes a partnership between actors at different levels in the supply chain, both large and small, that will help us, spread the approach of engagement and continuous improvement, not just among, let's say, the partners of the project, but in a much wider way, in a much wider fashion across the entire industry.
Do you feel as though you're able to have a ripple, or what's your goal in order to influence or scale some of the work you're doing today, and how are you going about that?
Let's say the Fair Cobalt Alliance is an alliance that openly invites all the different actors that would like to join and contribute to the changes we want to achieve to then again sign up to the Fair Cobalt Alliance. Or for instance, we are also open to talk to people that would like to join our partnership in the gold sector.
Well, Jersom said already one important thing, and that's that partnerships are key. But let me explain a little bit more our strategy that we have as Fairphone indeed to create this impact and the ripple effect you mentioned. Because Fairphone is, at least for now, still a very small player in the industry, but we have this very, very big ambition to change the industry and as we say, it really change it from within. So our strategy to do so is threefold in a way. Firstly, it's around building awareness about the supply chain, its complexities, the issues. And then secondly, really setting the example and proving that it's possible by creating actually our Fairphone, a phone that lasts, a phone that includes fair material sourcing and sources, a phone that's made by workers in the supply chain that are given a voice and for where their well-being is cared for. So that's our proof point really as a second one. And then thirdly, that's creating followers. So inspiring the rest of the industry to follow that example and to really gain that ripple effect that you mentioned. And that's, so that's actually part of our mission. And that's also part of our daily work. So we're actively working to share our best practices, to share our lessons learned. We do so in our blogs, in webinars like this. And ultimately, we're always looking and seeking for partnerships and collaboration to help reach that scale and that systemic change. So for those of you that are listening and that are interested, we look forward to hearing from you as well.
So I'll just finish up quickly here. The Jerusalem and Tirzah aren't online actively. I really appreciate them bringing a lot of this into a more specific context and the importance of ASM and how they engage with it. We're looking at that from a technology point of view. So how do we bring more partners together, as Tirzah closed on that, so that the ease of partnership and engagement on these issues, whether that be how to transition where there is irresponsible artisanal mining and where you can make improvements in artisanal mining for the benefit of the community, or addressing child labor and so on. These are all group activities and group efforts that have to be jointly shared in terms of responsibility, both for the work as well as the resourcing and financing. And so that's one of the key activities that I've been very passionate about, is how do we connect the supply chain to make peer-to-peer and peer-to-organization benefits and bring resources and funding and materials back to those activities. In one case, we have a grant with the Department of Energy here in the United States, where we're incentivizing consumers to bring back their phones and and other electronics to the appropriate centers, so that they can be recycled or resold effectively, as opposed to the 4 or 5 that of various electronics that are probably in each of your drawers. But what we're trying to do as well is to say, well, could you also use that same kind of mechanism to incentivize give back, or direct, we have a partnership with Accenture in tipping the farmer, but could you tip the miner? Could you incentivize them for, or provide a benefit or a fund for different types of activities on the ground? So overall, we're just trying to combine these various activities for, the accurate claims, efficient reporting, and ultimately the real impacts that we're driving towards, and that we'll be reporting these across different SDG indicators and being able to synthesize that information. We know that technology is not the solution, but we know that with different organizations, the work in the supply chain and technology, we can get to the problems that really are facing our time. So thank you so much for your time, and I'll close there. I know there's several questions, so I'm here until we say it's done. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Carrie. We do in fact have lots of questions. I'm going to start with some of the first ones. Let's see, so that were put in the Q&A box early. Okay, so how many, we have one from Adrian, how many, they ask, many NGOs, among other organizations, face difficulties with financing when their funds go to high-risk areas such as Syria. What can they do with technology in order to increase the trust of banks so these entities won't block their accounts or transactions? Is it a case-by-case decision, or are there countries that are on a blacklist?
I put myself on mute, sorry. There's no blacklist from our point of view, but we are doing different types of anti-money laundering investigations. So depending on the actor, if there's a history, they could be flagged in our research. But if it's just strictly about high-risk countries, our biggest issue is just making sure that the money is going where it's saying it's going. So that if that's what you're speaking to, just strictly the financing component, that is something that we could discuss. We haven't done any transactions in Zimbabwe because, as well as Central African Republic in terms of diamonds. So if that's specifically an area that you're interested in, obviously we we'd have to discuss it because of the relationship with the Kimberley process and other things, but there, otherwise we haven't had any ban other than to flag what is currently in trade requirements and norms.
Okay. All right, we have another question from ZH, who writes, thanks for this important topic. When engaging with new beneficiary countries in Africa or Asia, how do you reach buy-in to monitor supply chains and proceed with the measures described? Do philanthropists play a role, and who are the major contributors, for example, corporate social responsibility entities, etc.?
Yeah, so, and that might have been at the earlier part of the conversation before I got really to the give back section. Absolutely, philanthropists play a role, CSR people play a role. I think most people in the supply chain play more of a financial role in terms of percentage. There are people in supply chain activities and in CSR, departments that have real understanding of some of the supply chains, but and some of the activities on the ground. But I think we leave that to the real experts, meaning community leaders, those involved in local government, as well as philanthropists that might be working on the ground. So the idea would be more that we centralize the funding streams and simplify that so that, for those that are working in nonprofits, I'm sure you are writing way too many reports for the work you're having to do and spending far less of your resources and time on the actual impact that you would like. So we're hoping to be able to streamline that. So the funding as well as the reporting.
Okay, all right. Christina Malls asked, this is incredibly helpful, thank you. What are the most vulnerable points of the system? Is it when the gemstones are introduced into a blockchain system? How do they verify the point of entry of stones into the system? Is it bag, tag, and scan to follow a stone or parcel across the system?
Yeah. And that's where it's going to change, not change, but you're going to determine vulnerability of the system based on what you yourself perceive as risk. One of the reasons I brought out the Fairphone work is they're less concerned, and I will say that even they have far less sensitivity towards perfect traceability. So a concept of bag and tag and some of those relationships are not their main focus. Their main focus is, can I establish a reasonable chain of custody, and then is there impact on the ground associated with the impact that I'm looking for? That is not to say that traceability is not important, but it has a different priority order in terms of risk. So where's the most vulnerable risk for them? Their most vulnerable risk would be, are we actually making impact on, child labor reduction, and are those children being appropriately accounted for? What's happening with fair payment, and are the workers in the sites that we are operating in, and that we identify that we're operating in, receiving the fair payment that we believe they should, et cetera. If you're looking at it purely from a tracking and traceability point of view, some of the areas that I think are most vulnerable really are at those transfer points. And so when it's going from the artisanal miner especially to the point of a truck, in some cases you're seeing that those areas are being blocked, and that weigh stations and things are being more strictly guarded, so that it is in fact, X number of artisanal miners come in with their bags. This is what actually ends up on the truck. The truck is covered and weighed and scaled, and then appropriate documents are made for that. I don't think that happens consistently. I think we're definitely in a huge upswing of continuous improvement. I do hope that we find the right balance between strictness and continuous improvement and progression on that. From a tracking point of view, we document what happens, not necessarily judge if that is, best in class, and say yes or no. We might say this is what happens and do a comparison of what other people would do, showing maybe this is best in class, maybe this is norm, maybe this is below. we can do that as part of our data availability models and show clients that would want that kind of comparison. But yeah, that's probably a more of a long-winded non-answer than you wanted. But yeah, there's several vulnerabilities for gemstones. I would say when we're working with our consultant in the field, she's actually supporting, she's from Nairobi, and she goes and helps actually enter the stones. So there's far less risk. There could be, you know, mixing of stones when, you know, different miners come in. But right now, I think we're at a pretty low risk environment. There's not a lot of incentives for, you know, a lot of corruption or risks in that regard.
Okay, thanks so much. Let's see, another question from Hans Merkit. It's not seldom, but mining companies receive good ESG scores, even though a web search shows local or international reports of human rights, environmental abuses. Could Everledger's technology help to address this?
Could you repeat the first part one more time? Sorry.
Well, it was worded a little awkward. I think what he's meaning to say is, I guess sometimes there's a discrepancy between what the international, what you can find on a web page about mining companies and then what's actually happening on the ground. So
Okay.
that they are receiving good ESG scores, but in actuality, there might be human rights and environmental abuses going on.
Well, and this is an area that I would love to actually use, and I'll use my old auditor hat, but just better triangulation of data and more accessibility of data sources. So one of the things that was one of my favorite projects I've ever worked on was when I was working with a nonprofit that was more of an activist nonprofit over here, a more service provider nonprofit over here, and then an industry association. And we were working on different reporting of incidents on the ground that the industry association identified, and did they follow up on them? Now, we had a certain level of skepticism that, you know, what was that everything? Did that really get at least 80% of what was out there? And so we engaged with the more activist NGO to evaluate and do a benchmarking of all the incidents, all the grievance mechanisms, all the, you know, go out into the field and get as many as they could. And there was a discrepancy of a handful, but it wasn't as huge. Now that's just one case, but what if we were to enable grievance mechanisms to be gone through a distributed ledger, a blockchain technology where you as an individual actor could send an SMS to a distributed ledger associated with a geolocation and a material, and that could go to the appropriate actors with only the relevant information to follow up. There's grievance mechanisms in every single one of what I'm assuming this person is referencing, you know, in terms of the big mining associations and big industry associations. And what if we were to handle those things much more directly, while removing the sensitivity and potential retaliation to individuals? There might be some really creative ways to do that. And so I can't solve, you know, potential, you know, bias or simplicity of, you know, different types of audits or other things that people have as risk in what exists in these systems. I think that there's actually a lot more value in a lot of those that than we give credit. They may not be perfect, but if we follow the audits and the risks that are identified all the way through, we'd probably get a lot better accounting. But I know that there's a lot of other risks and the local direct issues that aren't necessarily captured, and we can do a huge amount of work to make sure those are incorporated.
Okay, so I have another question that's somewhat linked to working with all of the actors on the ground to monitor these situations. Judith Condor Vidal asks, do you work with indigenous communities? Do you face obstacles with land issues? What is your relationship with governments as you're working with, you know, these important sectors of the economy? So kind of trying to bring in the government and indigenous component.
Right now, we work with certain Indigenous communities in Australia, but not related to minerals. It's related to Indigenous art and craft material, and ensuring royalty payments returned to them for their materials and their production. So a different flip on it. Right now, I don't work with any artisanal miners in, for example, or sorry, Indigenous communities associated with the mineral supply chain in, let's say, Brazil or otherwise. And then, but I will say that technologies must be mixed, and that's something that I hope came out in this communication. One thing that I can send you other communications that I've been working on, but one of the things I'm very passionate about is mixing mobile money. That blockchain may end up being essential at the point of export forward, and that we use mobile money transactions to verify, up into the point of export. The mixing and matching of technologies and infrastructures are more of what will happen as we have these open conversations to say what works best here. How do I get that information there? What existing information and infrastructure is there that I can utilize? And I'm saying I, as anyone, you could be the NGO that's trying to do it, you could be a downstream producer. That's how we have to start thinking. And some of us are, from the technology side, are having those conversations. So I'm having conversations with mobile money providers. I'm having conversations with my peers and perceived, competitors. They're not fast enough. I'm impatient as well. But I think for those of you in this conversation, if you're interested in those, please let me know, and we'll continue to have more of those open dialogues and maybe separate sessions on that.
Okay, so Judith also had a second question, which you sort of answered. She was asking about, if blockchain is always the right tool, and do you combine with other tools? What challenges have you found? But also, I think what might be good to respond to is the last part of her question, which is, how do you make, for small scale miners, how do you make blockchain accessible to them? Do you provide, special educational materials to explain it to them? Do you, how do you introduce it?
Absolutely. What we've done to date is been working with consultants or like experts in the field. So with cooperatives that speak English that can talk to us, with PACT and the Moyo GEMS program, we contracted a third party so PACT could do their good work, and then we had a third party provider from Nairobi. She was able to actually do a lot of the entry directly with the miners so that it was happening in real time. But to that point, and just furthering that, in the future, maybe it's just that it's all done through mobile money, and it's just a digital invoice and a digital, yes, this happened on this date, is sent to the blockchain, so that it's all happening much more simultaneously and with some infrastructure that they're very comfortable with already. But that is all happening. We're in, the Gates Foundation has their project called Mojo Loop, where they're doing for the first time interoperability among many of the telecoms in sub-Saharan Africa. So there's a lot of things that are happening real time that we as a distributed ledger technology are also dependent on it. And so we're trying to do some things in parallel and see how we can start mixing and matching it. But in terms of technology, I just hope we don't try to recreate things for a lot of these communities, and so that we're being as efficient with their time and resources as well.
Okay, and then kind of in the same vein, someone asked, in the case of ASM supply chains, it seems like the data input is the biggest challenge to be overcome. For example, how do you bring relevant data on the supply chain into your system? Can you speak to how these data points are brought into the system? Is it done by Everledger, artisanal miners, supply chain actors, such as traders and exporters? I mean, you might have touched on this a little bit in the presentation, but maybe just further.
Everledger shouldn't be entering data, right? That is, we are technologists, and that's where my previous role is very different, where I would go to mines in Indonesia and help them like hull through all of their documents and be like, okay, let's start digitizing this, like put it in Excel. You know, that's not my role anymore. We would work with other actors. If it's NGOs that are supporting the artisanal miners, we will help train the traders or brokers or, you know, exporters on how to do that. But ultimately it should be them. We did contract for a short period of time with someone, a woman in Nairobi, as I mentioned, to assist so that like nonprofits like PAC that we were working with weren't being encumbered by it. So they didn't have to implement the training, or if there was a language barrier, so that would continue. But ultimately that should be resolved as the ecosystem develops and other technologies such as mobile money can be incorporated more readily with something that they're very familiar with. But yeah, in terms of just documentation right now, we're just trying to make sure that financial transactions can initially be documented. And so that's where we're really focused on digital invoices for something, an infrastructure that they would already use, that they'd already be able to establish credit from, that we wouldn't have to have separate ID or bio indicators, that really those people should be protecting their own privacy and their own data. And we don't want that to be something that we're holding independently. They've already established their identity through other activities such as mobile money. And so we don't really need to do that. So if we can bridge that gap, then we'll be very quickly to a point that they can self-declare really readily any of their information, their identification, and their transactions. So that should answer a lot of that, but I'm sure there's some nuances we can do more of in a future conversation.
Okay, so there's just two last questions remain that we'll go through because we're already going over. The first is, do you know whether or not Fairphone's Cobalt project is active currently? And the second is, do you think the EU regulations going into effect in 2021 that it require large gold refiners know their own vendors and technology, such as Everledger, will finally push the global gold trade to end the opaque system that we have today? So one question about Fairphone's project and the other about the new EU regulations next year.
That recording with Fairphone was just last week. We had to do it at different time zones with everyone. So I assume yes, unless something's changed in the last week. I talked to them on Tuesday on a separate matter. So I believe everything's all running and good to go. I think in terms of who's involved, that's not all public. I think there's an ongoing list of actors that are engaging more and more in that. So I would encourage you to reach out directly to Fairphone. But yes, active as far as I know, and going well. Otherwise on the EU regulations and the opaqueness of gold or many supply chains, I think we're continuing to iterate. And yes, many of us who've been in this for a long run, even though I know many people have been in this game for a lot longer than I have, but feels like a long time. It's slow going, but if I look at where we were 7 years ago versus where we are now, it's night and day difference in terms of how much information we have. I do think that the EU regulations for 2021 won't affect things like getting direct grievances in the supply chain. Not yet. I think we need a bigger push on getting that direct data, getting voices from the ground more immediately recognized and embedded in these systems. And we can. That's one of the reasons I'm so interested in technology. But yes, I think the regulations will help. I don't know how far it will pull that thread for the questioner or for myself's, ultimate desire. But I think we're getting some movement.
Okay, great. We had some really good questions. Thanks so much to everybody. And I think, Chie, you had a couple announcements you wanted to make before we wind up.
Yes. So Carrie, thank you so much for your informative presentations. And thank you so much for all the participants who actively participated in the Q&A session. I have several announcements. I'll be very quick because we are running over the time. We are currently running the Sourced with Love campaign. we'd love to celebrate the people who have diamonds, traceable diamonds, and that is conflict-free. We want to celebrate them, and we want to share your stories with those who don't know the issues yet. So if you have that kind of diamonds, please post your story with hashtag Sourced with Love, or you can also access to our webpage and fill out the form, and we will send you a gift if you share your story. And there are several opportunities if you want to support Diamonds of Peace. You can be an individual supporter if you like, and that starts with only $5 a month. So you can access to our website if you are interested. And there are also corporate membership opportunities for companies. So please access to our website if you're interested. Then there are also volunteer opportunities. We have about 60 volunteers, mostly in Japan, but several in the US and UK. Yeah, and the areas of volunteering could be proofreading, writing post articles, or organize events or webinars, or designing. So please access the website if you're interested. And one of our main activities to sensitize the consumers or potential consumers. So if you have any opportunities for us to speak at the event, please feel free to contact us. Megan.
I think that was about it. Let me see. I mean, there were two more questions, but do we want to do them?
It's up to Carrie.
Sure.
Okay. All right. So we just had a couple more details about tax. Okay. So what about taxes? Does mobile money include them? As you know, taxes pay for education and health, or do you skip them? And in many countries, small-scale miners are also part of the informal sector. How do you identify and input them in the system?
Yes, artisanal. So I'll start with the first one. That absolutely, artisanal miners are part of the informal sector, and yes, that's part of the work that we do a lot with NGOs. And you can see the work we're doing with Moyo Gems and how they're supporting formalization and registration, but also other NGOs that we're working with. It's a very similar process that they're identified as informal, and then how do you bring them into formalization? One of the reasons that we want to support their work with, having a digital identity that's protected and something part of their own infrastructure is so that they can be part of that formalization, but through a smart lens, something that will work for many activities, whether that be for them paying school fees or other things, getting credit in the future and other things. So that's where mobile money technology comes in. In terms of taxes, I do not do anything related to taxation. I know that some of the governments that we've talked to and that the Gates Foundation has talked to as well, in terms of Mojo Loop and other things with mobile money being a default banking transaction, that is a whole host of conversations that is way beyond my specific activity. But I know that part of formalization is the desire to make sure that taxes are utilized effectively for the community and otherwise. But yeah, I think that it's not a can of worms, it's just a much bigger conversation. But we do not implement that other than what would, for example, a mobile money provider, in terms of their specific fee structures that they would work out with the governments as a default banking service.
Okay. I think the other questions that are in here, we kind of touched on already. I mean, one is about how does Everledger or any blockchain system assure that what the system shows lines up with the gemstones in the bag, or their randomized audits to ensure that, which I think we kind of touched on.
Yeah, definitely we would be part of identifying anomalies. So that's something, and we can flag anomalies in a system. And so what we're working on now with customers, so downstream providers, is helping them establish, for example, templating what would be their minimum requirements. So filters and other things so they can do it, and then flagging any anomalies outside of that. For anyone that would be wanting to verify the system, that would be something else. We would be able to establish, okay, here's what would be the benchmark, and then here would be the filters for any anomalies that would be relevant. But yeah, that's part of what would be going forward.
Right, and then the other one is just how can we integrate these traceability tools into ambiguous regulation, which I mean is a little bit tied to the EU discussion that you had about the opaque system, but I don't know if you have further to say about that.
Not right now. I mean, I think it's still such an early game. What we're having conversations on the sideline is how far can you move it? You know, I mean, that's the difference. Is there's technologists that are out there that are going to say this will save the world. I'm not one of those, right? One, I'm not like a hardcore technologist. I'm not doing the coding, but I'm relatively aware of its limitations, but I'm also very aware of its strengths. And so similarly with EU legislation, I don't think any legislation solves the world's problems. I think it can bring us forward 1, 2, 3 steps forward on certain categories. And as I mentioned, I think there's still things that I would like to see improved for impact on the ground, not just regulatory requirements. But yeah, I think that understanding how far the regulations will go and how far technology can bring us to that, as well as what we desire for actual impact associated with the regulation and regardless of the regulation. Those are things that we can work on together if people have interest.
Okay, well, this has really been great, and as you can see, very engaging.
Well, thank you all. I really appreciate the time. Sorry we went over so much, but appreciate the patience with everyone.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Take care, guys. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.